This video is rated S for spoilers. Thorfinn is dead. He died with Askeladd. Thorfinn is no longer a real person. He's just a husk that listlessly drifts from one task to another. As a teenager, Thorfinn's hatred for Askeladd was his entire identity. Askeladd was Thorfinn's only living father figure, his love and his hate, and without Askeladd, Thorfinn is nothing. He's more than just depressed. He's a void, empty, hollowed out. The only notable emotion that clings onto Thorfinn is his guilt. Guilt over all of the fathers, brothers, and sons he murdered on his failed quest to defeat Askeladd. A warrior that is proud of a life full of murdering innocents is like a blind man marching straight into hell. And without Thorfinn's hatred, he can finally see exactly where he was going, and it horrifies him. He finds himself drowning in his past sins with no way to atone. Thorfinn knew how much it hurt him when Askeladd murdered his father, and through that hatred he found himself content with murdering so many more fathers. The only emotion Thorfinn feels is pain over those he killed. He looks forward to nothing in his day, and he doesn't have any hope for a better future. Thorfinn may as well have died with Askeladd.
今まで生きてきていいこと一つもなかったよ。
This is the man that Einar meets. Einar had lived a normal life as a farmer with his mother and sister until the Danes attacked, murdering his loved ones right before his very own eyes. After this, he was sold into slavery and bought by Ketil. Einar represents who Thorfinn could have been if he hadn't become a Viking. Einar's father was also murdered when he was young, but instead of pursuing a life of bloodshed like Thorfinn, he stayed on the farm to help his mom and sister. Because of this, Einar develops normally and has access to more human emotions. While the pain Einar felt while his family was murdered will never truly go away, he doesn't let that stop him from enjoying the good things in life. Einar still feels joy when he grows wheat or talks to a girl he likes, and he feels pain when his farm is destroyed or someone he cares about is hurt. When Einar hears that his slave owner will let him go after 3 years of work, he becomes optimistic for a better future, while Thorfinn couldn't care less if he was free or enslaved. Einar is Thorfinn's opposite because he hasn't let his terrible life sink him into a never-ending depression. Once Einar witnesses Thorfinn's fast reflexes after being attacked by Snake, he realizes that Thorfinn used to be a warrior. Thorfinn explains to Einar that he was a Danish warrior that invaded England, a part of the same army that murdered Einar's family. This fills Einar with rage, so he attempts to murder Thorfinn to atone for all of the people that he killed. But after hearing his painful screaming, Einar stops. He realizes that Thorfinn grieves so deeply over those he killed that it makes every night a living hell for him. Einar can't kill a defenseless man who grieves so deeply over the atrocities he's committed. In fact, Einar goes so far as to get mad at Thorfinn after he wakes up because of his apathetic behavior. It doesn't matter that they're both slaves at the bottom of society, and it doesn't matter that they've both lived through hell, because Einar sees human life as inherently valuable, and he wants Thorfinn to look at life the same way. Einar goes from murdering Thorfinn to being mad at him because he doesn't value his own life enough. Einar lives in his emotions, while Thorfinn lives in his apathy. Part of what makes Vinland Saga amazing is how Yukimura creates characters with opposite core traits that clash with each other. This is also known as a foil. Thorfinn is depression while Einar is hope. Thorfinn is death while Einar is life. Einar's optimistic spirit pierces through Thorfinn's apathy, forcing him to confront the horrors of his past. Bit by bit, Thorfinn opens up to Einar, and eventually Thorfinn is able to see who he was, who he is now, and who he has to become. With Einar's help, Thorfinn begins the difficult task of becoming human again. Thorfinn explains how his hatred for Askeladd used to control his life, but when Askeladd died, so too did his hate. Now he is empty.
憎しみがなくな
After getting into a fight with the farm retainers, Thorfinn is knocked unconscious, where he finds himself getting dragged back into hell with Askeladd. Once Thorfinn awakens, he knows what he has to do. Thorfinn has to swear off violence permanently. With this decision, Thorfinn finds a new path forward through life, to follow in his father's footsteps and become reborn. In Vinland Saga's prologue, we bore witness to the life and death of Thorfinn, the warrior of hate, but the Farmland arc is about the birth of Thorfinn, the true warrior of life. The reborn Thorfinn embodies the principle of unconditional love and forgiveness, the type of person who has no enemies and will always try to find another way when faced with violence. In this way, Thorfinn is like Viking Jesus. The point of Vinland Saga is to put a person who fully embodies the principle of unconditional love into an environment where murder and pride are seen as virtues and forgiveness is seen as cowardice. Would it even be possible? Devoting one's entire life only to love and creation and never to destruction is an unrealistic goal that has never been truly achieved by anyone. But even with that being said, Thorfinn has to try. He needs to find a way to avoid all violence, even if power-hungry tyrants exist. Power-hungry tyrants like Canute. In a genius twist, Yukimura gives Thorfinn and Canute almost identical character arcs set in reverse, so they serve as each other's foils at both ends of the story. In other words, when they first meet, their core character traits are opposite, and then they swap character traits with each other over the course of 4 years for their eventual reunion. When Thorfinn and Canute first meet, Thorfinn embodies physical strength and hate. He has developed calluses onto his hands and his heart through a life of murder and rage, and he's naturally talented at battle. On the other hand, Canute represents cowardice and sensitivity. He's a pacifist who fears confrontation and pain. Canute dreams of creating a utopia without suffering, and it's through that dream that Canute realizes he has to change. Canute has to take control of the painful world he hates in order to save it, and he can't do that as a weak pacifist. Similar to how Thorfinn became a perfect soldier to pursue his life's goal of killing Askeladd, Canute has now become a sociopathic warlord to one day achieve his utopia on Earth. Canute even poisons his own brother that he once loved just to guarantee his position as ruler of both Denmark and England. The tragedy of Canute is that he sacrifices every part of himself in pursuit of creating a world without slavery and war, a world without unnecessary suffering. But in truth, Canute is too blind to realize that his utopia can never exist. Hate begets hate, and violence only leads to more violence. This is an obvious truth that Thorfinn sees clearly, a truth that escapes Canute. Canute tried to run away from the coward he used to be, and while he wears the face of a king, he is more scared now than ever before. When Thorfinn and Canute first met, Thorfinn was a fearsome warrior who brought death and Canute was a pacifist. But when they meet again, their roles will be swapped. Canute will be the king of death, and Thorfinn an idealistic pacifist. When art is masterfully done, it feels like puzzle pieces naturally falling into place. There's real poetry in how Yukimura manages to have two character arcs naturally grow in opposite directions, so they always contrast perfectly against one another. I love it when characters and stories battle not only with physical strength, but also with their ideals. When a character verbally battles with someone who challenges their core belief system, you are able to witness the real emotions and motivations that drive them. Vinland Saga is so masterfully done that I sometimes struggle to find words to express how good it really is. When art is so good that you struggle to find words to express its quality, you just have to give up and call it a masterpiece. The plot of the Farmland arc gets set in motion when Ketil goes on a trip to give gifts to King Harald. Thorfinn and Einar had recently finished creating his new farm, and Ketil tells them that he'll set them free upon his return. Ketil arrives in Jelling to find out that King Harald had died, so he decides to give his gifts to the new king Canute. Little does he know, Canute was the one responsible for Harald's death. While murdering Harald solves future problems that would arrive if the Danish kingdom remained divided, Canute still had another large issue to solve. Many English people still hold resentment towards their recent conqueror, Canute, and without a standing army, Canute fears that an uprising is inevitable. In order to quell these fears, Canute needs a standing army that is always ready to destroy an English rebellion. The only problem is that Canute can't afford a standing army, and he doesn't want to raise taxes in England or Denmark, as that would sow resentment from the locals. The way Canute sees it, he only has one option left, which is to requisition the land from wealthy farmers by creating reasonable excuses to make them enemies of the state. As luck would have it, the wealthy farmer Ketil had just arrived in Jelling to offer his gifts to the king, and during their meeting, Ketil's son Almar asked to join the king's guard. Canute decided to test the boy by asking him to cut a cooked pig in half, and after failing the task, Canute sees this as an opportunity to requisition Ketil's farm. This brings me to my first and only real complaint with the writing of Season 2. There's too many unlikely events during Ketil's time in Jelling. Not only was it already a bit of a stretch that Canute would just so happen to target the farm that Thorfinn was sold to, but his plan involves a bit too much luck. Canute's plan is to have a professional coin flicker hire a group of obnoxious Vikings to make fun of Almar until he gets upset and challenges them to a duel. Then the coin flicker will flick a coin extremely hard with pinpoint accuracy so that it takes out the Viking's eye, giving Almar an opportunity to land a killing blow, even though he couldn't cut a pig. Then the king's men will kill Almar and hold Ketil responsible for the crimes of his son, giving Canute an excuse to requisition his land. Not only is this plan extremely unlikely already, but it would be easily foiled if Ketil just showed up to the duel to stop his son. The major fix for this problem is easy. Just have Canute create some distraction that ensures Ketil won't be close by to stop Almar's duel, rather than having it left to luck. Either way, Canute's plan works out for the most part, except that Almar doesn't die, and the Ketil family manages to escape due to another overly convenient coincidence. Earlier in the story, a string of coincidences led to Ketil meeting Leif, and Leif learned that Ketil owns Thorfinn. After Thorgel kills Canute's soldiers, they are able to escape on Leif's ship in exchange for Thorfinn. I can accept some coincidences in a story, but there's too many coincidences during Ketil's time in Jelling for it to feel believable, and the luck involved with Canute's plan could have easily been improved if he just planted a distraction for Ketil. Plot conveniences are by no means as egregious as plot holes or illogical character decisions, but I thought it was important to point out the minor flaws in an otherwise amazing story. Alright, now it's time to get back to the positives, which is the rest of the video. When you think of a slave owner, the type of person that comes to mind is one who controls others through fear and violence. This makes it all the more brilliant that Ketil, the slave owner of this farm, is a deeply empathetic character. He feels for those less fortunate, going as far as to allow his male slaves to buy themselves back after only 3 years of manual labor. That's a better deal than what most indentured servants would get during America's early years. As far as slave owners are concerned, Ketil is practically a saint, at least to the male slaves, which makes it all the more brilliant when he becomes pure evil after being pushed to the edge. Ketil has two large weaknesses, his insecurity and Arnheid. Iron Fist Ketil was a strong warrior who died in battle, and Ketil assumed his identity to be respected and feared since that helped grow his wealth. At heart, Ketil is afraid of confrontation. The distance between who Ketil is and who he pretends to be makes his feelings of insecurity grow as large as his wealth. The only person that Ketil reveals his true self to is his slave Arnheid. Because of this, he has developed an obsessive love for her. She is the most important person in his life, and he can never let her go. While some slave owners are cruel because of their hate, Ketil is cruel because of his love. Once Ketil returns home from his trip in Jelling, he is a broken man. The king of the Danes has made him an enemy of the state, and he may lose everything. Due to being filled with anxiety, Ketil needs the one thing he loves most. He needs Arnheid. But what he hears breaks him even more. While he was away, Arnheid attempted to escape with her husband. She even cut his ropes while he was being held captive, allowing him to murder more of Ketil's men. Upon hearing this news, Ketil has finally been pushed over the edge. His sanity is fully broken. His entire life is falling apart, and the person he loves most has betrayed him. Ketil begins beating Arnheid with a stick. She tells him that she's pregnant with his child, but in his insane state, he doesn't believe a word that she says. After all, if he caught her betraying him once, how many other betrayals has she gotten away with? After being pushed over the edge, Ketil beats the person he loves most to the brink of death and murders his own child. The writing of Ketil is genius. He represents how absolute power over other human beings corrupts absolutely. It doesn't matter that Ketil is sensitive or empathetic. When one human has control over another, the desire of the person in power always comes first. If Ketil truly loved Arnheid, he would have let her go, but instead he traps her in a cage and beats her when she tries to run away. It was brilliant how Yukimura didn't make the slave owner a generic villain psychopath, but instead an insecure, sensitive man, because it shows how there is no such thing as a good slave master, just different shades of evil depending on the desires of the owner. I know the overall message that slavery is evil shouldn't be too surprising to anyone, but what I'm most impressed by is the execution of how that message is conveyed. It's masterfully done. Slavery isn't evil because it's controlled by corrupt men. The system itself corrupts all men in power, regardless of whether they are kind or cruel. Arnheid's life is a tragedy. She is one of the wisest, most morally just people in Vinland Saga, and she is punished at every turn. Her husband Gardar fought an unnecessary battle for fortune only for his entire village to end up enslaved. Arnheid was against the decision to fight, but since she was a woman, her vote didn't count. Due to her husband's failure, Arnheid became a sex slave to Ketil, and just when she had given up on being able to take an active role in her life, Gardar returned to her as a runaway slave. He was quickly captured by Snake, but Arnheid didn't have the heart to do nothing while her husband suffered, so she went to tend to his wounds. Arnheid broke down crying, which eventually gave Gardar an opportunity to murder one of Snake's men. Fearing that they would both be executed for the death, Arnheid cut the ropes binding Gardar, which resulted in even more death. Eventually, Snake caught Gardar again and landed a killing blow. They managed to escape Snake momentarily as Gardar's wounds overcame him. When Gardar was dying, he thought of their son and said, once he's old enough, he'll probably say he wants to go adventuring. All boys do, but I won't allow it. Upon hearing this, Arnheid realizes how much her husband has grown. He's seen the horrors of war and now wants to live a quiet life with his family, the type of life that Arnheid always wanted. Smart person learns from their mistakes, but someone who is truly wise learns from the mistakes of others. Unfortunately for Gardar, the world he lives in is too cruel to give him a second chance. He learned his lesson too late, and his entire family paid the price. After Snake's men capture Arnheid, she is beaten by Ketil for disobeying him, and her baby is killed. Thorfinn and Einar try to save Arnheid from the farm, but it's no use. After a lifetime of misery, Arnheid realizes that she has more loved ones in the grave than on Earth. She asks, "Why do I have to be alive?" When Thorfinn and Einar don't have an immediate response, Arnheid finally gives in to her wounds and lets go. As Thorfinn attempts to resuscitate her, Einar finally reveals his true feelings to Arnheid. He says she has to go on living because he loves and needs her, but it isn't enough. Love isn't enough for Arnheid. In a world full of war and slavery, love has only ever resulted in misery for her. Although Arnheid's life is a tragedy, it's also not unique. In our past, there have been millions of men and women just like her. People whose lives were ruined by war and slavery. Good people who were crushed by the world until they didn't have a reason to keep living. It's for people like Arnheid that Thorfinn has to create his utopia, a place without war, so that when someone asks Thorfinn what reason there is to go on living, he'll have an answer. Vinland Saga is all about Thorfinn's pursuit of that dream, no matter how impossible it might seem. Another amazing character is Snake, the captain of Ketil's soldiers. At first he appears like another leech that does little work and profits off of Ketil's wealth, but when pushed to the edge he acts like an honor-bound knight. It doesn't matter that Snake uses a fake name so that he can run away from the crimes of his past, and it doesn't matter that his master Ketil is turned into a deranged sociopath. He will commit 100% to his oath to obey Ketil. Snake openly admits that he and his men are nasty scumbag criminals, and the way he justifies these inadequacies is through his honor-bound nature. This makes Snake an immensely interesting character. Even with that being said, Snake's actions are evil throughout most of the Farmland arc. He stays loyal to Ketil after he goes insane, beats a pregnant woman, and gathers a ton of locals to die to Canute's army. Despite following an evil master, I still somewhat respect Snake's conviction to uphold his oath. Snake knows that he might die if he follows Ketil into battle, yet he marches forward anyways. As far as morals are concerned, Snake is most obviously a villain, but he's a villain with honor. Part of the reason why it's so easy to see the positive traits of a villain like Snake is because he is viewed through the eyes of the reborn Thorfinn, who always tries to see the best in people. One of the most epic scenes of Season 2 was when Thorfinn was trying to defend Arnheid's husband Gardar from Snake. Gardar had killed 5 of Snake's men, so Snake must kill him to pay the price. Thorfinn wants no one else to die, so he has to break his oath of pacifism to save a life. I loved this moment so much. It felt like Thorfinn was a superhero in disguise who finally revealed his true identity to Snake, but instead of being a superhero, he's one of the strongest warriors to have ever lived in disguise as a slave. Thorfinn has a really cool fight where he manages to keep up with Snake despite being unarmed, but he ultimately fails to keep Snake from killing Gardar. Thorfinn's main regret from the situation isn't that he lost the fight, but that he couldn't avoid it. Thorfinn likes Snake for being a kind and principled man, but he also couldn't let Snake kill Arnheid's husband. Thorfinn was only given 2 options, fight or give up, but he can't help the feeling that he skipped the first method where all violence could be avoided. The climax of the Farmland arc is all about Thorfinn discovering that first method. After Arnheid's death, Thorfinn decides that it's time for him to do just that. He can't sit back and let anyone else die without attempting the first method. Thorfinn asks to see Canute, but he is rejected. Eventually, he reaches an agreement with a member from Canute's army that if he can survive 100 punches without dying or being knocked unconscious, then he will be allowed to speak with the king. This is when Thorfinn truly becomes Viking Jesus, but Thorfinn takes the idea of absolute forgiveness a step further. While Jesus said, "Love your enemies," Thorfinn says, "I have no enemies." Instead of challenging the Vikings to a duel to let him see Canute, he decides to turn the other cheek. Thorfinn allows himself to become the punching bag just for a small chance of being able to save other people. This is Thorfinn's first method, the method where he can avoid the deaths of others by allowing himself to take the pain. Despite getting hit over and over again, Thorfinn does not hate his aggressor because even the source of his pain is not his enemy. No one is. After getting hit 100 times, Thorfinn and Einar are allowed to meet the king. The reunion between Thorfinn and Canute is magnificent. Thorfinn is the confident pacifist Canute once strove to become, while Canute is the image of strength Thorfinn once fought to become. Although both characters are polar opposites, they are also the same, for they believe in the same goal: to create a paradise on Earth free of war and slavery. I love it when Canute announces his true enemy. It's not the English, it's not his fathers, nor is it the Vikings or himself. Canute's true enemy is God. A God who puts humans on this earth with disease, famine, and free will to pillage and murder all of those beneath you. Creating a true paradise on earth would be an act of rebellion against God because he made humans evil and selfish in the first place. Canute has taken it upon himself not to be a savior to the weak, but to save those who have given up their souls. Canute declares that he is the savior of the Vikings. Vikings. Thorfinn finds it incredible that Canute is trying to save the Vikings, but Einar sees it as a weak excuse for Canute to justify murdering tons of people on his path to making a Viking paradise. In some way, Canute announcing his position as savior of the Vikings is his way of admitting defeat. Canute is starting to realize that he can't achieve his utopia on Earth because the goal is inherently paradoxical. If he doesn't use his Vikings to kill, he will lose his power, but ordering his Vikings to kill spreads the very suffering he once sought to prevent. Canute knows that his goal is unreachable, so he found a compromise that destroys few while saving many. Canute tells Thorfinn that he'll need to kill him if he wants to save the farm. Thorfinn responds to this by running away. Canute laughs at first because he was expecting Thorfinn, one of the strongest warriors in the kingdom, who took 100 punches to the face just to see him, to have something up his sleeve. Some kind of threat, another attempt at his life. But no, Thorfinn's intentions are pure. He allowed himself to get punched 100 times not to threaten the king, but to have a small chance at saving lives. It is through Thorfinn's selfless behavior that Canute is reminded of the person he used to be. Before he sold his soul to the crown, Canute used to really believe that he could rid the world of slavery and war. Although Canute has only ever failed in pursuing this goal, the fact that the Vikings could produce someone as selfless as Thorfinn fills Canute with hope that one day his goal may become a reality. The amazing thing about Thorfinn is that he's able to disarm Canute's mindset. Canute always assumes that everyone around him has the worst intentions possible. This mindset is valuable to have as a king because it's true. Many people in your court are vultures who wouldn't mind picking at your remains. But when Thorfinn tells Canute that he'll run, everything changes. Canute realizes that Thorfinn is able to openly disagree without being a threat. In other words, Canute realizes that Thorfinn isn't his enemy, but a valuable ally pursuing the same dream of peace. Once Thorfinn breaks Canute out of his kill or be killed mindset, Canute is finally able to see clearly. He realizes that he can trust the English to uphold the peace, and that maintaining a standing army is an unnecessary precaution. Canute enters peace talks with Thorfinn expecting to find an enemy, but what he finds instead is an ally who can fill the gaps where his paradise fails. While Canute strives towards the ideal of peace on Earth, Thorfinn lives it. If the prologue to Vinland Saga is all about how hatred exists in cycles, the Farmland arc is about how to break the cycle. While most authors would increase the conflict by making the main character fight the villain, Yukimura makes his main character become a pacifist. Some may think that this would result in the story becoming boring, but what they don't realize is that spreading love can be more difficult than spreading hate in a world full of violence. I think part of the reason why I love the Farmland arc so much is because of how relatable Thorfinn's character arc is. Many teenagers will feel angst towards the world and be depressed about all of the things lacking in their life. And after you become an adult, you realize how useless all of those emotions really were. Upon having this realization, you have to shed the useless negativity from your youth and figure out what is left. Of course, Thorfinn's hatred and rebirth are far more extreme than most due to his circumstances, but there is a universal truth to Thorfinn's growth. A truth that says you should seek love instead of hate. A truth that allows me to see part of my own life reflected through Thorfinn. A truth that makes Vinland Saga a timeless masterpiece. Well, this was a hard video to make. I just really hope that I was able to do the anime justice with this video. When I'm writing about something that I don't particularly like on the channel, it can be pretty easy, I can write the essay pretty quickly, but when I'm writing about something like Vinland Saga that really does mean a lot to me, sometimes it just feels like nothing is good enough. Like, is this the best way to express how I feel about this, you know? It's a difficult process. Before ending the video, I'm going to mention a few things that I didn't fit in the video that I have thoughts about. One tiny issue I had with the final episode of the season was that Thorfinn's entire conversation with his family about his adventures was skipped. I understand that the manga and show do this to save time on re-explaining events, but I still think it would have been really cool to hear Thorfinn summarize some of the most important events in his life, such as Askeladd's death, and then you could hear his family's reaction to those events. Thorfinn basically has a secret identity as one of the strongest warriors to have ever lived, and it would have been interesting to hear him reveal that side of himself. This is the one and only time I would enjoy a recap episode in anime, and it feels a bit like it's a missed opportunity that didn't happen. Also, I felt like I didn't have enough to say about Almar to write a whole section, but I think his arc of being an arrogant coward turned hardworking married farmer was well done. Almar's story of changing after witnessing the horrors of war is a simple one, so I didn't have too much to say about it, but it was executed very well. It was inspiring how at the end Almar told Thorfinn that he wanted to be a real man just like him. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please do the YouTube things to help push this video to more people, and if you loved the video and want more anime content, you can help out the channel on Patreon. And if you hate me and want to destroy the channel, then I will run. Goodbye.